Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, about the very first character I ever talked about on this channel, almost 6 months ago to the day. Today we'll be talking about Talbot Grimes, better known as the Blight. But before we go any further, don't think that this is some redux of my old Blight video or me treading back over old ground. While the video I made almost half a year ago concerned itself largely with the Blight's implications for Dead by Daylight's expanded story, I neglected to actually look at the character of the Blight himself and the design decisions that made Talbot Grimes into the character he is today. Back in August 2020, when behaviour began to tease the release of the Blight, nobody could have foreseen the kind of killer that we were going to get. We had guesses such as a werewolf, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, John Carpenter's The Thing, and Tai Lung from Kung Fu Panda somehow. Maybe we were thinking from the furries, I don't know. A lot of people did nail it and correctly guess that this new killer was the alchemist from the first Hallowed Blight story, The Hunger. But even those who did were still barking up the wrong tree in one way or another with regards to his actual power. Most of the guesses either seem to be revolving around that transformation idea, where he injects himself with pustular serum to make himself stronger, or playing hard into a clown-style, experimental chemist angle, where the alchemist would inflict debuffs on the survivors. What I'm pretty sure nobody saw coming was a high-mobility chasing killer, who spends 80% of his time running into walls, and the other 20% running you over. See, I was kind of excited for the alchemist as a killer in the game because I love a good mad scientist. I find the tropes and themes typically associated with them, such as hubris, obsession, and the rejection of the human experience in the pursuit of something greater, to be really compelling. Something I'll be looking into further in a video I have planned about the Doctor in the near future. So when the Blight's power got revealed and I got the chance to play with it, I was a little underwhelmed. My expectations for what kind of killer we'd get from a colonial-era alchemist who experimented meticulously on the other killers during the Hallowed Blight were thoroughly subverted. But not in a positive, Jojo Rabbit-esque, holy fuck, they actually managed to pull it off kind of way, but in a Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker sort of disappointing way, like it was done spitefully, or out of neglect for what had come before. Full disclosure, part of this might be due to just how much I dislike the Blight's power, both in concept and execution. I like killers where you make a decision early and are rewarded for it later. Like infecting a group of survivors early instead of committing to a chase, and being rewarded with them being fully broken later down the line. Or leading one of the twins along a route the survivor is most likely to take and then chasing them with the other one, to get paid off when they run right into you. They allow for skill expression by both the survivor and the killer outside of the chase, meaning you have to think about stuff and stay on your toes even when you're not actively being chased. When you outwit a survivor like that, or when you see what the killer is trying to do and beat them at their own game, that, to me, is the best feeling in this game. And from the character described in the stories of Talbot Grimes, that was what it looked like we were going to get. When I read his story, I saw him as a more nuanced and human take on the conventional mad scientist trope, compared to the unapologetically cruel and inhumane Dr. Herman Carter who preceded him. Talbot's story balanced the real-life horrors of human experimentation for the British East India Company during the First Opium War, with a surprisingly sympathetic story about how ambition and a desire for constant improvement can drive a man with good intentions to acts of extreme cruelty. Talbot is a meditative, focused and methodical man haunted by the ghosts of his past. But the Blight as is implemented into the game couldn't be more different. The Blight is played aggressively, as you switch targets almost impulsively and use your physique to cover ground quickly and run your victims down. The power doesn't fit the character, as if they designed the power first and couldn't be bothered to make a character that fits properly, so they just used the alchemist since he'd already been established as a character in the lore. People wanted to see him in the game anyway. It's like Talbot and the Blight are two completely different characters. One is intellectual and thoughtful, the other is unpredictable and aggressive. But maybe I'm judging the Blight too harshly. There is undoubtedly a disconnect between the two sides of his personality, but maybe that disconnect can be rationalised or understood. Maybe there's a method to behaviour's madness that I just haven't seen yet. So I decided to retrace behaviour's footsteps, working backwards from the Blight's original inspirations, to see if there's a common thread tying it all together. So that's the point of this video, making Blight make sense. And I've got to play a lot of Blight to do it. Oh joy. I thought a good starting point for my research here would be to look at the mad scientists of fiction and see if something like this had been done before, where the scientist assumes multiple, drastically different personalities that change him both mentally and physically. This research took me all of 3 seconds because that trope is fucking everywhere, to the point of being a pop culture cliché. Seth Brundle immortalised by the iconic Jeff Goldblum in The Fly, Marvel's Bruce Banner and the Hulk, the Master turning himself into the human Professor Yana in Doctor Who. The more you look for this trope, the more widespread you realise it is. Don't get me wrong, it's not a trope exclusive to scientists by any means. We've seen it with characters like Smeagol and Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, and Kevin's various personalities struggle against each other in Split. But it is particularly noteworthy with regards to scientists because of the progenitor of this trope, where it all started in popular culture. The strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Penned by Robert Louis Stevenson in 1886, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde follows the lawyer Gabriel Utterson, who is a friend of the respectable scientist Dr. Robert Jekyll. Fraught with the desire to do evil and selfish actions, but reluctant to do them himself due to the moral and material consequences of those actions, Jekyll creates a potion to bring out an alter ego of himself, known as Mr. Edward Hyde, so that he could lose his inhibitions and enjoy committing evil without guilt or regret. As anyone who's been on the internet before will tell you, giving people the option to erase their own identity often results in them being unpleasant or cruel to other people because anonymity helps them assuage any guilt they would otherwise have had to deal with. Jekyll creates the Hyde persona to function like that for him, simultaneously acknowledging that he has an evil side that he wants to indulge, but also has enough of a good side to know he'd feel guilty about it if he ever actually did any of those things. Like a child with an imaginary friend, Jekyll uses Hyde to shift the responsibility for the evil things he wants to do. I didn't take the cookie from the jar, Hyde did it. I didn't not pay for WinRAR, Hyde did it. I didn't face camp that Fagman because she clicked her flashlight at me like a toxic little shit, Hyde did it. If we read Talbot's story, we can see that he has a similar moral divide to Jekyll, but deals with it in a very different way. From his time at the London School of Medicine, where he was reprimanded by his superiors for his methods, to his 7 years of human experimentation in the employ of the British East India Company, we can see that Talbot Grimes performs unethical actions on the regular to get the results he needs. But he spends a lot of his time trying to avoid the moral implications of what he's doing. He brushes off reports of his test subjects committing atrocities in the field of battle as mere exaggerations, and it's only when he is literally dragged kicking and screaming to the bodies that his experiments created that he finally comes to terms with what he did. But instead of trying to bury his guilt by hiding behind an alternate persona, Talbot acknowledges what he did and accepts whatever punishment is to be inflicted on him. In many ways, he's a bigger man than Jekyll. Instead of rejecting his identity and his humanity to hide from his sins, Talbot owns up to what he's done and is almost killed for it. But if Talbot chooses to take responsibility for his actions, rather than hide behind an alternate persona, where does the Blight come from? And why am I comparing it to Jekyll and Hyde? Because, like Dr. Jekyll, the effects of Talbot's transformation into the Blight only become obvious when it's too late to do anything about it. Once Talbot is taken by the entity, he almost immediately begins work to attempt an escape. He found an abandoned laboratory full of notes by a mysterious Vigo, chronicling his attempts to escape the fog using something called Putrid Serum that he collected from the pustular flowers that grew across the entity's worlds. Once a year, during something called the hallowed Blight, the entity swelled with these orange flowers that seep a viscous orange nectar. In a desperate attempt to reconstitute the formula that Vigo had used to escape, Talbot began to harvest this nectar and produce compounds that he would test on as many living subjects as he could, himself included. This is where the 3 years of the continuous hallowed Blight skins came from. They were the results of Talbot's experiments with the serum, as he would test it on whichever killers he was able to capture and subdue, for long enough to fill them up with this orange goo. Side note here, I don't fully understand how he was able to capture some of the killers for long enough to do this. Some of the more ordinary ones, like Ghostface or the Legion, I'm willing to spare my disbelief that Talbot was able to overpower them with the help of the serum. But there's no way you're convincing me that even with the serum's help, that he was able to overpower someone as beefy, not to mention electroconductive, as the Doctor. Much less literal actual ghosts like the Nurse, the Wraith and the Spirit. Did he get the other killers, the ones who weren't blighted, to help him out? Because now I can't get rid of the mental image of Charlotte carrying the Huntress over her shoulder, while Victor runs behind her carrying a little bucket full of hatchets. By the way, if anyone wants to draw that, tweet it to me or put it in the Discord because I'm sure we'd all use a laugh. Where was I? Talbot's transformation into the Blight. Much like Jekyll's potion that he used to bring Mr. Hyde out, the effects of the pustular serum were only temporary. The killers' bodies would return to normal once the hallowed Blight was over, and for Talbot that wasn't good enough. He needed to come up with a permanent solution, and fast. Especially once the entity realised what he was doing and banished him to the void, without his equipment and without his test subjects. The sheer terror Talbot felt as he realised his number was up, when he was so close to success, can be summed up quite elegantly in these notes from the Hallowed Blight 2018 event. It's here. The entity is here. It has found me. Talbot's desperation led him to Compound 34, his final serum that he tested in a last-ditch attempt to escape using a single pustular flower he'd found growing in the void itself. And it didn't exactly have the desired effect. Compound 34 didn't return Talbot home, but instead broke his mind and twisted his body. The hunger shows Compound 34 pulling him out of the void and back into the entity's world, a very different man from the one who went in. That is the Blight we know today, a gnarled and serum-soaked imitation of who Talbot Grimes used to be. One both miserably aware of the nature of his new existence and powerless to change it. This reminds me a lot of the stage in The Fly, when the reality of Seth's transformation starts to hit him, and he realises there's no going back now. He's become something wholly other. There's nothing he can do about it. It's a tragic moment as Seth pushes Veronica away, with the understanding that he's changing into something monstrous. And it's similarly tragic as Talbot realises there's no going back from who he is now. He's not just the conscientious Dr. Jekyll anymore, he's also Mr. Hyde, an inhuman creature shaped by Talbot's own hubris and ambitious desire to perfect his experimental formulas. But there's one thing I really don't understand. Talbot's obviously still intelligent, or else he wouldn't be able to make the serum he's become completely dependent on. The most recent Blight story, Doors Unknown, suggests that the damage that the Compound 34 has done to his mind comes in the form of hallucinations and memory loss, but doesn't actually impair his cognitive functions beyond that. He can still think. So, why did he spend his time running into walls? I don't get it. I don't understand where his power comes from. Like, the idea behind his power just doesn't make sense to me. It's like the power belongs to a whole different character. What am I supposed to say about this guy? Why am I even making this video? Playing is nothing short of a fucking chore. Winning feels unsatisfying, losing feels infuriating. Why am I making this video and not Doc? At least Doc's fun. For fuck's sakes, his shitty ass POV and the stupid fucking Lethal Rush hitboxes and the sliding. Oh fuck, the sliding! Fuck it, that's it, we're done here. Just don't like and subscribe or whatever the fuck it is you people do. I've had it, I'm out! Shitty ass fucking killer running around bonking, looking at stupid fucking running around brushing, Jesus Christ!
So yeah. This file was sent to me on a flash drive in an unmarked envelope covered in curse words with a dead rat and some heavily used pictures of the plague that frankly disturbed me greatly. Sounds like whoever was working on it was having some frustrations about the Blight, so I thought I might be able to help. Being a devoted Blight main myself, I'm much more concerned with how his power works rather than the story behind it. Blight is something I'm very passionate about, and it's quite an honor to be invited to talk about Blight in this context. I may not be the most qualified person to talk about Blight and how his power fits in with his lore, but I can at least offer my own perspective. Originally, I wasn't a big fan of Blight at all. In fact, one could go so far as to say I hated the overall concept from the get-go. Especially after playing him in the PTB, I was convinced that behavior had yet again rushed a killer concept and completely botched the end result. Overall, Blight had me quite unexcited. It was only after a recommendation from a friend that I checked out the new and improved Blight post-release. I instantly fell in love, and I've been completely enchanted by the seemingly limitless possibilities his power presents. While simple in theory, it's incredibly complex in practice. It's in this way I think his backstory and lore is represented. Blight, at the end of the day, is nothing more than a mere human, corrupted by the very thing he sought to understand. His lingering humanity is reflected in that, unlike the other killers with seemingly supernatural abilities, the extent of Blight's power is that he's able to run really fast. That's it. No shocking survivors with electricity, no collecting blood and powering up, no blinking through walls, and definitely no invisibility. Although he does seem to have a knack for popping up when you least expect it. While the concept of being a human pinball comes easily to most people, utilizing this killer's power to its max is quite difficult. Not only are you in a fight against the survivors, but you're also fighting against the map and the props within. Memorizing the properties of the environment around you takes a lot of time and game sense, which can distract you from the main goal of catching the survivor. Playing Blight is all about balancing your priorities and focusing on the most important thing at that moment, which can change on a whim. Don't even get me started about the intricacies of flicking, which elevate the skill cap for this killer far beyond any other in the game. High-level Blight play is fast, methodical, and intense. It's a blend of both science and art. The very best Blights seem to almost dance while they play, rushing from tree to rock to survivor with a certain amount of finesse and grace that I am yet to see in any other killer. The amount of self-expression and creativity his power allows for is something uniquely human, and this serves to highlight what I believe Blight is all about. That being human ingenuity and the pursuit of perfection. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got survivors to chase and flicks to hit. Cheers.
Happy place, Will. Happy place. Victor in Dakar. Okay, I'm back. Sorry for losing my rag earlier. I've calmed down a bit and I've been reflecting. Whoever this, American is, he's definitely got a point. As I played Blight more and more for this video, I came to realise that while his power is functionally isolated from his lore, that doesn't take into account the evocative feeling that using the Blight's power can impart onto the player behind the screen. I talked about this in my Halloween video, where I addressed how Michael Myers' power evokes the feeling of being the Shape, and how that feeling is a big reason for his long-lasting popularity, despite the meta shifting against him as power creep pushed Michael further out of relevance. When the Blight is mastered at the highest level, I can start to see where that level of evocative gameplay can come into its own. That's why I missed it on my experiences playing him. Because I haven't poured the time into him that is necessary to unlock that sensation. While this video's been in production, I've been watching not just Ascension, but other accomplished Blight players such as Lilith Omen, RGB Thighsocks and Hindi Arts, who are absolutely enamoured with this greasy little pinball, and spend their days trying to figure out everything they can do with the tools the Blight gives them. Talbot himself will be proud of their experimental spirit and pursuit of perfection, even if they haven't read enough about his lore to know it. And as for where his lore does tie in with his power, let me take you back to the Jekyll and Hyde comparison for a bit. The strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde comes to its end when overuse of the potion causes Hyde to take full control, and the consequences of his evil actions start to come back to bite him. To protect himself from repercussions, Hyde starts to make another potion, one to turn him back into the respectable Dr. Jekyll and cover his tracks. Except, much like the initial potion only turned Jekyll into Hyde for a short time, Hyde's new potion was very limited in its effectiveness, to the point of only working in extremely heavy doses. Eventually, Jekyll realises that once Hyde takes over, there'll be no going back to his former self. So he writes a letter saying farewell to those he cared about, before Hyde takes over one last time, only to commit suicide before the police find him. With that in mind, I'd like to show you the end of the Blight story. It doesn't finish here where he takes Compound 34, it finishes here, when the hallowed Blight comes round once again, and Talbot's body is transformed still further by the influence of the Putrid serum. The real ending of Talbot's story can be seen in the true Blight's skin. Only in this total degeneration to something truly inhuman and monstrous do we fully see the Hyde behind the Jekyll. What passed for humanity in the Blight's mortal form is gone now, as his body twists to resemble the swollen cankers from which he used to drain his serum. The monstrous side of Talbot Grimes is fully on display now, as even his once human mind eventually submits to the insidious influence of the flowers. Talbot is exceptionally fortunate that, unlike Mr. Hyde, his final iteration is not yet permanent, as his body returns to its more human state after each hallowed blight, much like the flowers recede. But one day, it just might be, and on that day, every sin Talbot Grimes has done, every life he's ruined and every sacrifice he's made in the name of advancement will bite him back. His transformation into the Blight will be complete, reduced to a slavering, mindless beast, rampaging across the entity's realms until it finally dies from pustular withdrawal, and nothing of Talbot will remain. So here we are, at the end of the Blight story. Has my opinion on him changed? Kind of. I still don't think the Blight's power fits well with his lore, but I do see how playing him lets you buy into the fantasy that Talbot's character promises of being logical and scientific in your methods. And the lingering idea of the true Blight perhaps being Talbot's final destiny does tie in nicely with the idea of his power being purely physical. If the pustula has completely corrupted his mind, then running around like a maniac seems entirely in character. Turns out there really was a method in behaviour's madness after all, and if you ask me, I don't even think they knew it at the time. The Blight was, in many ways, an experiment with a different kind of character, and whether it was a success or not is ultimately up to you. Regardless of my own opinions on the killer, I definitely gained a new respect for Blight's devoted fans over the past few weeks. Even though I still thoroughly dislike playing him and have some issues with the core tenets of his design, I've got to admit the Blight community is first rate. Big thanks to Ascension, the voice of reason in today's video, and an extremely dedicated and skilled Blight main. The links to his stream, his YouTube channel and his Discord server are all in the description, so please go and check him out. This was my first actual collaboration on the channel and it couldn't have been with anyone finer. If you like what I had to say about this killer and his story, then please do consider subscribing, maybe like the video if you feel so inclined. Or just write me a comment talking about how much a piece of shit I am for not loving the Blight as much as you do. really anything goes. If you really like me and want to see more, I stream on Twitch every Wednesday and Sunday at 7:30pm GMT, and you can join the Discord server or follow me on Twitter to ensure you never miss a stream. You can even support the channel on Patreon or Ko-fi if you want to throw a bit of money my way, and the links to those things are all in the description. And that's all from me now, so thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you for the next one. And let me promise you something now. Once you see it, you won't see things quite the same again.